Welcome back to another Service Management Leadership Podcast. We have a returning guest, somebody I really enjoyed last time, and we even have a two-parter for you. This is part one, by the way. Akshay Anand, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back again, Jeffrey. I know we've been having quite a few back and forths on LinkedIn, but I think we finally decided we have enough to be able to hit the record button and just see where a conversation takes us. Right?
You know, I way more than people realize, I appreciate thoughtful discourse on these topics just to help me think things through. So I appreciate your insight and your expertise. So you've been in the ITIL community a long time. You've been a beacon in that community a long time. And ITIL 4 has some new wrinkles. ITIL 4, I think, it's a big shift for people that have progressed ITIL V2, V3, 2008, 2011. And one of the big wrinkles, I think, is the guiding principles. I think yes, they were there in the practitioner V3, but these are front and center now. The guiding principles are front and center, and there's 7 of them for those of you who aren't familiar. And they're central to the success of ITIL 4. What is the purpose in your mind of having those so central to the service value system? We'll start there.
It's a great question. And yeah, well, I mean, we came up with the guiding principles way back in the, it wasn't even called ITIL 4 in the early days. It was called ITIL X because we didn't know what it was going to be called. And so this is going back to 2017, 2018, I think. So it's been a while since I've had to think back quite so far. But there were a couple of reasons why we put the guiding principles into ITIL 4. The first, I think, was when we published ITIL Practitioner that you'd referenced. One of the overwhelming piece of feedback was, we love the guiding principles. That is really, really good content, and it's good to have these sort of Paul Wilkinson from Gaming Works, who's still threatening to retire this year. He used to have this acronym called ABC, Attitudes, Behavior, and Culture. And we realized that through our research, as well as through conversations with people like Paul and yourselves and things that we'd observed in our prior experience, that there needed to be a sort of central set of values, right? Yes, many organizations have a set of values that they document, that they promote. Some people just, lip service, it's posters on a wall somewhere. Some people, some organizations really take it seriously. But we realized that for service management professionals to succeed, service management teams to succeed, they need to have their own set of principles by which they would make decisions, by which they would act or even behave. So things like focus on value. Well, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we've got the end goal, the end outcomes in mind, the end value statement, the value proposition in mind. So that could mean that we design our services a certain way. That could mean we choose to optimize our workflows, our processes in a certain way to remove waste or to make sure that we're meeting the needs of a minor stakeholder who might not be directly involved with the service, et cetera, et cetera. So the guiding principles were pulled forward from practitioner because we wanted to preserve them. And we realized as we started working on ITIL 4 that they would need to be front and center, not just a chapter at the back of a higher level book or something like that. They had to be grounded into day-to-day behavior from day one, essentially. So if you think about somebody's learning journey and career journey, when you start off in service management and you start working with ITIL, you're going to go on ITIL Foundation. That's when you're first introduced to guiding principles. And should you choose to continue your journey, take further certifications or increase your exposure to ITIL or IT service management, you will keep coming across the guiding principles because a lot of the literature has been grounded in that from the very foundational architecture. So we were able to hit a lot of birds with one stone, as the saying goes. One of the things that people I perhaps don't fully appreciate about the foundation book, it's not just there as a book to help people get through the course, study for the exam, etc. But for those people who are working on ITIL 4 literature, it was our reference guide, right? It was for us to be able to go back and say, right, how exactly did we position focus on value? How exactly, what was our definition for organizational change management or architecture management? What were we saying there? Does that still hold true? How do we evolve, or how do we build on it for the next set of literature that we have to write? Because we had that sort of staggered publication approach. So for us, Foundation was a reference guide more than it was a study guide. And that's why we made put the guiding principles right there in Foundation, so that we could always refer back and build on it as we developed subsequent literature.
And this is just my view, and it's coming off as a statement, but I mean as a question. I feel that the guiding principles in the 4 dimensions of service management are central to everything that we do. So if we pick a practice like incident management, the guiding principles apply. You still have to figure out the 4 dimensions, who the players are, what are they doing, things of that nature. And I just see those as a way, as a lens, as I'm wearing glasses, a lens to see all that we do in ITIL 4.
You're absolutely correct with that. And by the way, I just want to say props and kudos to you for the series you've been doing on the podcast, like doing small little snippets talking about different aspects of ITIL 4, promoting the book that you've just published, because I think they're really good consolidated overviews of what each little bit of ITIL 4 is all about. I in fact remember Roman Zhurevlev, who's the development manager or the program manager for the development of ITIL 4 guidance. He had tried to create this sort of 3-dimensional diagram, which was essentially the 4 dimensions as the base of a rocket ship, and then the service value system being the length of the rocket ship, trying to say that whatever aspect of the service value system you're looking at, you need to also apply the 4 dimensions to it. So when you are looking at governance, when you're looking at value streams, when you're looking at practices, looking at continual improvement, who are the people involved, and what are the skills you need, and the culture that's appropriate for that type of work? What are the processes and value streams? What are the third-party supply relationships you need? What are the tools or the information you need? Again, every aspect of the service value system has those 4 dimensions sort of orthogonally going across them. So they were kept separate for ease of understanding, but it's all sort of enmeshed, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes. All right, so back on the guiding principles, and I appreciate your indulgence there as I veer a little bit, but I just, as our listeners hear us talk about it, and I thank you for the kind words as I was putting out those nuggets, just help people along. Because even though we read a lot, I think it helps to have somebody talk about it. We all learn differently. So of the 7 guiding principles, which one do you think is the most difficult for organizations to adopt?
Boy, you waited, 10 minutes into the podcast before sandbagging me with that one.
I'll tell you the one I think. I think the most difficult one, everybody's going to say focus on values easy, but I think assessing where you are, start where you are, and knowing exactly where you are, and not overreacting, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, US term, or thinking more highly of ourselves and starting immaturely, I think is one that's going to be difficult for people, because just like in our personal lives, it's hard to get an actual readout of exactly where you are.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think every guiding principle can be understood simply, but there can be a very there can be a very slippery slope from simple to simplistic, if that makes sense. So it's very easy to say focus on value and say, oh yeah, I understand what that means, or start where you are, oh, I understand what that means. But then there's a danger that your understanding is too simplistic and you're actually missing the true intention of what's going on here, the true depth of what's going on here. If I had to pick one that was going to be perhaps the most difficult, I would agree that focus on value is probably going to be a really, really tough nut to crack. not because teams, practitioners, organizations cannot focus on value. Indeed, they may be very good at defining what value means. But the nuance that sometimes escapes these same teams and practitioners and organizations is that value can mean different things to a lot of different stakeholders, right? And I'll use the example, an example that I've used several times in the past, a ride-sharing service, right? As an individual customer of a ride-sharing service, it's very valuable to me. I can keep to my schedule. I can get from point A to point B. That's the outcome. I don't have to worry about paying for my own car and insurance and fuel, and I don't run the risk of not finding parking at my destination. So very simplistically from VOCR, you can sort of lay out why that service is valuable to the end user. But then what about my local community? The same ride-sharing service, if it takes off, means that there are more cars on the road. It means there's more pollution, more traffic. It means that, at least here in the UK, we're very well invested in public transportation. It might mean that public transportation use of public transportation declines. So the same service can be viewed net negative by another stakeholder group.
Yep.
So most organizations, right? Most
see.
organizations are really good at defining value from the end user's perspective, but fail to recognize all the other impacted stakeholders who might not be part of the actual day-to-day transactional nature of that service, but who are impacted nonetheless. Sorry, I spoke over you just then.
Oh, I spoke on you. You paused and I jumped in too quickly, but I see that often. I'm going to give an example that everybody can relate to. Security has phishing emails, which serve a great service. But if you, after the third one, you get a day timeout, it may conflict with the other services you're trying to accomplish. And so there has to be the broader, how do we make this work for all? And that's a very simplistic one I've seen up close. And, there's so many, especially when you talk about the value, because what's valuable to me may not be valuable to you. And so that think and work
value
holistically.
Is subjective.
Yeah, think and work holistically means we got to get everybody to the table so we can focus on value, right?
Yeah. The other example I use with this one is contactless payments, because this is something that we saw through a lot of the COVID lockdowns, when the use of cash declined because people didn't want to be touching objects and passing them to other people, and also maintain social distancing and those sorts of things. Again, as a I would say relatively tech savvy end user, Apple Pay or wireless payment systems, extraordinarily useful for me. But then I remember visiting my parents. They're reasonably tech savvy, but maybe not as tech savvy, and they were naturally suspicious of using mobile banking services or transacting via an app as opposed to visiting their local branch or the telephone banking or other sorts of things. And I do remember reading so many sort of research reports from different parts of Europe, especially, which said that, look, it's great that people aren't using cash anymore, but we have a lot of people who have no fixed abode, refugees, homeless people, right. These sorts of communities who, because they don't have a fixed abode, are struggling to get bank accounts. And without bank accounts, they have no means of actually paying for the services that they need. So the same service, wireless banking or contactless banking, or call it mobile banking, is super useful for one group, kind of useful for another group, and absolutely harmful to a third group. But if you were to ask a company to define their value proposition, they would probably pick the first one because that's what is most valuable to them. And I think there's a moral imperative, an ethical imperative, that when you are creating services, you try to see beyond the 80% that you're serving and say, what are the needs of these other people who might be adversely impacted if we go this route, and how can we make it better for them? Whether that's mobile banking, maybe it's an AI. we create this great AI product. Who are the people that we're displacing with this AI product, and how can we make it easier for them to be reabsorbed into the economy? Maybe, can we get them some training to refresh their skills? Can we find other things that they can be doing, et cetera, et cetera? If I had to pick the second guiding principle, which I think is going to be difficult for people to adopt, it's going to be optimize and automate, because in my history as a consultant, and don't know if this matches your experience, Jeffrey, people will rush to automate and then optimize.
Yes.
Right? Because they want to demonstrate the fastest time to value, the fastest time to implement, because that's what they're being measured on, rather than saying, let's work this out on paper first. Let's run it a few times on paper to make sure it's going to work the way we want it to. And then once we've worked out how we want to work, I say paper, Excel spreadsheet, whatever it might be. After we've worked that out, let's start to automate, right? But let's face it, the reality is that people will say, right, we've just signed a contract with vendor X, Y, and Z. We've gotten funding for the next 6 months to get this in place. Go. You don't have the time to actually do the optimized part. You're rushing straight into the automate part.
I'm going to tell you this, and this I mean to offend zero people, but in my research, upwards of 70% of organization, and this is my use case for your example, up to 70% of organizations are looking to replace their IT service management tool or their IT asset management tool for this reason, that they did not understand the stakeholder outcomes they were trying to achieve and work backwards. They jumped straight into the automation, and then they're like, hey, this isn't meeting our needs. We need another tool. And I'm like, whoa, no, let's figure out what what are the outcomes you're wanting, and then we'll see if your current tool does it or if you need a new one.
There's a really good sort of anecdotal example that I can offer your listeners here, Jeffrey. This was at I think, DevOps Talent Conference back in, I want to say 2017, where I listened to this guy's talk, and it was really interesting because they were talking about how while they were a small startup or scaling startup, they had a small development team that outsourced their ops to somebody else. And they were trying to work more collaboratively. They were trying to work more efficiently. And so they said, you know what, every night, just send us a log, or this particular time in the morning, send us a log of the previous 24 hours from this particular service, right? So they just got a text file coming through, a CSV file coming through that they would open in a spreadsheet, and they would scan it manually and try to figure out what they needed. Then they learned from that, and they said, right, for our work, we recognize the particular string of characters that we need to look out for. So they wrote a little macro in the spreadsheet to be able to say, when I open this, just quickly highlight that string so I can be quicker at scanning through this dump file. And then as they got more refined on that, and worked out the kinks and flaws with that system, they said, okay, we don't have to open it in a spreadsheet now. Let's write a script so that as soon as that file is emailed to this particular mailbox, it is processed, and those particular strings are extracted and then put into our Kanban board or our ticketing system or whatever it might be, so that the developers can look at it first thing in the morning. For me, that's an excellent example of optimize and automate. They didn't jump straight to the end automation that they ended up with. They sort of said, let's start where we are. Let's progress iteratively with feedback. Let's figure out what needs to be done. Slowly build in bits and pieces of automation to help us at each step. And then once we've got to a point where we're comfortable knowing what we need to do, that's when we jump into automation and build out this proper solution for what we need.
So you brought up a question that I get frequently, and by one of the prominent people in Europe in the service management world, pressed me on this and said, do we really always have to optimize before we automate? And my answer is, and you'll laugh at this maybe, always and never are two words always remember never to use. But I don't think always, but if you put something in prematurely, you have a high risk of failure that you're gonna, because your risk of your tool, your optimization costs way more than your optimization. So your automation better be right the first time.
That is absolutely spot on. The consultant's words are always "it depends," right?
Yes.
Those two lovely words, "it depends." I think if what you're trying to automate has had a long history of successes and failures and has a high level of understanding and is simple to understand, etc., then it's a prime candidate to just shove straight into automation. There is no need to optimize it. Everybody knows what it is, and over time, so there hasn't necessarily been a discrete "let's optimize this process" step, but over time it's worked itself out. Everybody understands what needs to be done. Just go straight to automation. But if it's a process that's relatively new, if it's maybe it was adopted in the last 24 months, let's say, or built on the previous tool and there's some flaws uncovered, or this might be a brand new process for the organization, then don't you want to work out how you're going to carry it out first before you jump into automation? That's, again, it's very beguiling to be, and this goes back to everybody's favorite topic, IT governance, but it's very beguiling to say, we only have a runway of 6 months. We've got to get this in place. So let's just start running now. Let's not take the time to learn to crawl, walk, and then run. We just got to start running now. That's a whole other podcast conversation, I think.
Oh, and I would enjoy that. So as we start coming to close on part one, I have a loaded question for you. And I tell you it's loaded ahead of time. Whenever we see something like the guiding principles, it makes me wonder how we got here. What were the pain points that said, hey, we need to address this in this way? Because usually most of what we do, whether we want to admit it or not, is a result of something else that happened. What were the triggers or the pain points that led to the development of the guiding principles?
Well, I think a lot of this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The nature of service management and service management work is changing. It has changed dramatically since 2011 when V3 was updated. And I think David Cannon, who's been a guest on this podcast before, he has made the point that when ITIL was updated to the 2011 version, of course, the work would have been done in 2009, 2010. The iPhone had just launched, right? AWS had just launched and was starting to get traction. So a lot of the tools and the techniques and the technologies that we take for granted now weren't around then. So as the use of those tools has changed, so has the place for service management and how service management is being conducted. So that's one of the reasons. Second, again, connected with the rise of some of these new tools, we also had new ways of working emerging from software development and engineering spaces, agile of various flavors, and then of course DevOps came along, and they were showing the IT community that there were indeed better ways of working, more human-centered ways of working. And service management by nature is not about working with technology, in my opinion. It's about working with people who work with technology, right? It's about managing the work that's going on. And some of that work is, of course, being done in a technical system, but a lot of that work is being done by people, whether that's decision-making, approvals, or sort of, logging tickets, whatever it might be. So between the evolution of technology and the impacts on organizations, the emergence of new and in a lot of cases better ways of working, all these were having impacts to what the future of what, sorry, I'll start again. All these were having impacts to how service management was being positioned in an organization. And we felt that unless we took the time to write about how service management can return to becoming more human-centered, then there's a long, slow path of decline into oblivion. Right. So this was our attempt to introduce that course correction and say, elevate yourselves out of procedural conformance and start to look at why your role exists in the first place, why your work exists in the first place, and how can you add value back into your organization. You can add value by focusing on value, on optimizing and automating, on collaborating and providing visibility, on progressing iteratively and taking feedback from others, so on and so forth. And that's how the guiding principles emerged.
Now, I wanted, just as you are articulating that very well, it struck me how almost each one of those has a personal component. If I'm focusing on value, it means I have to talk to people, figure out what's valuable. Iterate with feedback. Obviously, feedback is people. Collaborate, work holistically, optimize, even assess, focus, start where you are. You have to involve other people, and it's getting us out of that. And when I use this term, it may be too US centric, but a long time ago there was a movie called Field of Dreams, and it was a baseball movie, and it said, if you build it, they will come. And I'm of the belief that's how IT has viewed itself for a long time. And now we're having to say, we're not the ones building it, you will come. You're telling us how you want it built, and we progress iteratively with feedback. And so I really appreciate hearing that personal, people-centered approach.
Absolutely. I can't believe I had to say this in 2022 to a number of people. I mean, I started realizing this around 2019, but people have to be reminded that ITIL is a framework within a domain called ITSM, and the M there stands for management. So it's not the management of technology, it's a management of services, and services are a way of creating outcomes for other people. So ultimately, there is a human connection somewhere in that chain. And so we're talking about the management of those human connections over time and the improvement of those human connections over time. Driven by technology or enabled by technology, technology is definitely there, but it is not the central focus of ITSM. The relationships and the value you're creating, that's the focus.
Right. And if we even think of outcomes is rarely technology. The outcomes are for people, and it's rarely technology. It's something people-centered. Help me make better decisions. Help us have better delivery. It's helping those outcomes. So part one, Akshay, this has been great. Do you have any parting words as we close this week's episode?
I would say if there's anything that people take to heart from their ITIL 4 Foundation class or their read through of ITIL 4, yes, please let it be the guiding principles. Whether or not you choose to adopt, whether or not even you choose to adopt ITIL 4's own set of guiding principles, if you want to come up with your own set of guiding principles, by all means do so. But every organization, every team needs to have that North Star. It needs to have articulated a set of values, a set of norms, behavioral norms that help everybody in that organization or team understand how they're expected to work, how they're expected to collaborate, how they're expected to behave or make decisions or whatever else it might be. So whether or not you even follow the ITIL 4 guiding principles, I would say have a set of guiding principles. It could be, I'm not going to work outside of 9 to 5 every day. Fine, that's fine. That's your guiding principle. But once you have it, make sure you abide by it. But equally, remember, going back to ITIL 4's service value system, another component at the same level of guiding principles is continued improvement. So you could also make you should make the argument that no guiding principle is set in stone. You might have a particular set of processes or procedures or what have you to focus on value, or you're collaborating in a particular way. Jeffrey, today we're collaborating over Zoom to record this podcast. But if this does not work for us, we need to look for other channels. We need to look for alternatives. That's continual improvement. So a guiding principle is not set in stone. I mean, this is not, this is not the stone tablet sent from on high, right? It can be adapted. It can be iterated upon, it can be improved, but it has to be improved with a goal in mind.
And take that step further, the improvement cycles are speeding up, and we have to be flexible in that. And at least that's my view, is that if Zoom's not working out, you don't wait to the 18th time you use Zoom. people are antsy by the third, and then they're expecting by the fourth you to have another answer. And then if that doesn't work out, move on. The days of doubling down and sticking to your guns, those are gone, in my opinion.
That's right.
And so it's
That's
great
right.
having you on. Everyone stay tuned for next week's part 2. And thank you once again, Akshay.
No, thank you, Jeffrey, and everybody. You'll hear my lovely voice again next week, I'm sure.
Bye. Welcome back to another episode, part 2 of Service Management Leadership Podcast. We have part 2, Akshay Anand with us. Hopefully you heard him last week. Akshay, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about service management.
And so today, you can tell I'm excited. I always enjoy these conversations. One of the much discussed parts of ITIL 4 is the move from processes to practices. And that's been discussed why and all that stuff. There are 2 new practices that I appreciate, and then I'll let you tell me which ones you like. I like the focus on metrics and reporting. It's called measurement and reporting, just because people need to not take what's directly out of the tool and call that golden. But we need to have a practice of how do we report well? How do we measure well? And organizational change management. Organizational change management is one of those things that everybody thinks they do well, and 95% of them do poorly. And so I appreciate the practice. Which are the ones that stick out to you?
I mean, I think you've highlighted a couple of really good ones with measurement reporting and OCM, organizational change management. A bit of perhaps a history lesson to give a little bit of insight into some of the practices that we came up with. We realized that with ITIL v3 and 2011, people had come away with a belief that there was one process. There's the incident management process. There is the change management process, whatever it might be. And there was a lot of emphasis on the process, designing the process, conforming to the process, and so on. And what we wanted to emphasize is, whilst the outcome might be the same, different teams might have different processes and procedures to achieve that outcome. They might be working with different tools to achieve that outcome. So think about incident management, because that's a very mature practice in pretty much any organization, nearly every organization. The way your security teams handle cyber incidents is different from the way your engineering team will handle server or database incidents, which is different from how your development teams might handle application incidents. The outcome ultimately is the same. You are minimizing the disruption to your organization, but the tools you use, the procedures you use, even the process you use, that might be completely different. And so that's why we wanted to elevate the discussion from what is the process of incident management to what is the practice of incident management? How is this being done, or how can this be done across the organization? And that's how we were able to also bring in the 4 dimensions. So we had the model, the reference model, to talk about organizations and people, information technology, partners and suppliers, value streams and processes. There are a couple of changes from V3's processes to ITIL 4's practices. For example, access management no longer exists as it didn't go from an access management process to an access management practice, because we felt that, well, we've kind of got it covered between information security management and request management. That's kind of what access management is about. Change transition or change planning and transition, change evaluation, is covered with change enablement, to an extent OCM, to an extent project management. So there are well-established practices within organizations that we didn't have to just create stuff. There are new ones, of course. Architecture management comes into play, risk management comes into play. And what we're saying is not that organizations need to have separate, distinct teams handling this. All we're saying is organizations need to have this capability, right? And that history lesson I mentioned is when we were developing the first drafts of ITIL 4 Foundation, practices were called capability. It didn't pass the translations check, unfortunately. So that's why we had to find another word, and we found the word practice, which existed in the V3 glossary already. But we wanted to describe the capabilities of a service management team or service management organization or service organization more broadly. The service organization needed to be capable of managing incidents, need to be capable of managing risks, of developing and improving on an architecture, etc., etc., etc. That said, I think there's one practice which has tripped up a lot of people, and that is service desk. Service desk practice. Because service desk, as we all know, Jeffrey, was a function in ITIL v3, right? And it was talked about as a specific team who was dedicated to being that central point of contact, et cetera, et cetera. But with the evolution of tools, technologies, organizational structures, and so on, we realized that there were a lot of different teams across an organization who were acting like a service desk. Right? If you think about the purpose of the service desk, it's a way of taking in work for that organization, right? So some of that work could be end user incidents and requests, certainly. But the work could also be incidents from a monitoring tool or an event management tool. It could be requests for new software functionality, right? And what we saw is rather than going through this single point of contact function, as it was described in V3, the work was being, the communication was happening directly with the teams who were delivering on that work. And so it made sense to move from a service desk function to a service desk practice and talk about the channels of communication, the techniques of communication, how are you registering the work, how are you, the incident, how are you registering the request, and so on. It made so much more sense to talk about service desk as a practice rather than as a function. But that's thrown a lot of people off because there's still, and there will be for quite a long time, I'm sure, a team in organizations called a service desk. That's not the same as a service desk practice as described in ITIL 4. And I think that is throwing a lot of people off.
And the reason I like it being a practice, I wasn't part of the how we got there, but it's because the service desk means many different things now. It can mean the chat bot. It could mean I email you something and the tool turns it into a request. It could mean a lot. And the idea of a practice to me, which can be flawed, and I welcome your feedback, is how do we get better? You mentioned capabilities, which is a new thought for me, but it's how do we do things better? Like if I think of a legal practice or a medical practice, they're not status quo. They're like, how do we do things better? How do we deliver better outcomes? And so that's what my mind hears when I hear practice.
That is quite correct. It's definitely spot on. The thing that we should also keep in mind, though, is that practice is an umbrella term, right? You mentioned legal practice or medical practice, and in that context, there is one organization under that practice, right? But equally, a practice can be a collective of different teams who are all working towards the same outcome. So the network of solicitors in your hometown could also be defined as a practice because they are all working to help their customers reach legal settlements or apply the law correctly, or sign contracts in an appropriate manner, whatever it might be. They're all working to that same outcome, albeit with maybe different stakeholders, different customer groups, or following different processes, using different technologies. But they are all providing your hometown, your community with that capability, right? So I think that's another important point that we can spend a little bit of time talking about if you prefer, Jeffrey.
Yes.
Which is a practice is not synonymous with a team. A practice can be a singular team, just like you have today, an incident management team or a problem management team or whatever it might be. or it can be a capability that's developed across several teams. So it depends on how you want to structure your organization.
I like that thought. And I mean that because I've been places where there was one change manager. I've been places where there was a team of change managers. I've seen places where the change manager also wears database hat, and it's not the definition of I'm doing change. It's the how is it being executed and how do we do things better in that capability. And that capability thought process is still resonating with me, Akshay, just because whether you have 100 change managers or you have one part-time, it's still offering that capability for those outcomes to the stakeholders.
That's correct. Whether it's your self-organizing team managing their own changes, whether it's in another part of it's the same organization, a weekly or a fortnightly cab, whether it's your vendor communicating with you to say when they're scheduling certain patches or updates to be deployed to your SaaS instance. These are all examples of a change enablement capability for your organization. They're all part of the same practice. So I think in the previous podcast, we talked about changing ways of working and these sorts of things. That's also part of the reason why I think the world is moving away from this singular, practice equals team to practice equals network of teams, sort of a construct. And if it helps you, and certainly if it helps your listeners, Jeffrey, think of practices as capabilities. What do you need so that your organization has the capability to manage whatever it might be? And it could be that you need to manage these types of work, this type of work differently from that type of work. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. And that's why I try to think in outcomes, right? Like what outcomes do people need from this capability? And if we focus on that, it gets us to that focus on value, guiding principle, and all that sort of thing. So I tell you ahead of time when I throw you a loaded question. So I'm a big believer in this statement. People that know me know I say this often, but ITIL 4 is less prescriptive than previous for part of these same reasons. And by prescriptive, ITIL V3 said on incident management, do this, then this, then this, then this. ITIL 4 is saying, hey, value streams, you want to execute the work as quickly as possible, deliver those outcomes the most efficient way as possible. And so I think it's going to take more nuance, more expertise to help organizations get there, because everybody likes a list, right? I mean, that's why they put them in the IKEA and the other boxes. Do this, then this, then this. So what guidance would you offer, because your vast experience in this, what guidance would you offer for those who are trying to make sense of this less prescriptive nature of ITIL 4?
You weren't kidding with the loaded question thing. Look, in my experience, there's a couple of reasons why people are saying ITIL 4 is less prescriptive. One reason, which I've come across very frequently, I mean, I don't have proportions and percentages, I'm not even going to go there, but one of the reasons I find more frequently is that people have been exposed solely to the literature of ITIL 4 Foundation, right? Which is the first book in an entryway into a massive library of, I mean, going back to ITIL being, the L was a library, right? There's literally a library's worth of literature here. But people are only looking at Foundation. That's the first class they take. And it could be that they've been steeped in the ITIL V3 literature and books for so long that their organization, or they've decided proactively that, hey, I need to take a look at ITIL 4. They go on that Foundation class. And in the Foundation book, every practice is described in about 2 to 3 pages, right? As compared to in the ITIL V3 books, every process was 20 to 30 pages. So they're looking at it and saying, there's about 1/10 of the volume of guidance here than there was in the previous version of ITIL. ITIL 4 is not prescriptive enough. It doesn't tell me what needs to be done, right? And to those people, what I have to keep saying is, look, there is a lot of what you're calling prescriptive guidance, but that is a separate digital-only document that's available on part of the Axel's website called My ITIL. And we actually did some maths a couple of years ago, about a year ago, when all the practices finally finished publishing. And we realized that across the ITIL 4 library at the time, in terms of the book, so Foundation, Create, Deliver, Support, Drive Stakeholder Value, et cetera, there was roughly about 1,000 pages worth of content there. But if you looked at the 34 practice guides, plus the how to use practice guide on My ITIL, there was about 1,200 pages worth of content there. So there's double the amount that you would see, but you have to know where to look. And the reason why, I mean, some people say, oh, you made it difficult for us to find the information, etc. And I do sympathize with that. But the reason why the practice guides are digital is because I say we, Axelos now, because at the time of recording, I've left Axelos, but we updated the practice guides once a year to reflect the feedback we've received, to reflect new things that we've observed, or different ways of working that we've observed. If we'd stuck them into one of the books, then just think of the headache, the difficulty we would face every time we needed to make an update. We would have to reprint the book, right? Oh, and what is then the knock-on impact to certifications, to training, to it became a huge sort of mess that way. And so there was a very early product management decision that was taken, that in order to be able to provide good guidance to people, the books would focus on, let me start with the practice. The practices would be digital only, so they could be updated frequently, and they would tell you what you did in a practice. The books would then take that practice information and tell you how you could apply it to create the outcomes you want, whether that was creating the value streams you wanted, managing the customer touch points, creating good goals cascade and reporting mechanisms coming up, whether that was creating lightweight procedures for lean and agile teams, whatever it might be. The books describe the context in which you apply the practices, and the practice guides tell you what exactly you do within the practice. So, sorry, that was a very, very lengthy answer. I do apologize for that. So the other aspect of the less prescriptive, the lesser reason I find, is because a lot of people have, I don't want to tar everyone to the same brush, so I'll say a lot of people have, their exposure to ITIL has been, here's my organization's process guide, which is based on ITIL, and I equate that to what ITIL says, and I can see a lot of roles and responsibilities and procedural level information in this ITIL guide that my company has put out. Now you're a manager, or you're now progressing in your career, you're taking new learnings, and you come to ITIL 4, which says, apply critical thinking, think for yourselves, your teams, you know your organization the best. You have the answers locked away, but you need to take the time to think about it and unlock them in your own mind. That's why it's less prescriptive, because the answers are already in your head. So yes, you can leverage great consultants like yourself, Jeffrey, and certainly don't want to take business away from folks like you, but you're there now as a facilitator rather than somebody coming in to say, this is what you should do. You're instead of coming in and saying, have you thought about it this way? Let me coach you to succeed. And you're bringing a different skill set to bear now that sets people up for long-term success, rather than success at the end of the project. Let's cut the cake, let's have a drink, see you, we're not going to see each other. So, we're changing the focus of what consulting means in that respect as well.
I'm in 100% agreement with you. And I was waiting on bated breath there, because the reason why I say that, and it leads to my next question, but let me set this up, is because consulting organizations had come in and say, let me repurpose all the process documentation that I've done for every client. And I think of ITIL, when you say framework, I think of it as a color of paint, right? I go to the paint store, you can go to the paint store. our abodes look differently with different lighting. We could put the same color of paint in the, in the rooms are different sizes, and it'll look different. And that's how I think of ITIL and all these practices. There are colors of paint that when applied in different situations, they look different. And but let me set you up with this. So I think a lot of the tool makers are still under the V3 processes in the way the tools move. This is mine, you can disagree. I think a lot of organizations were set up with V3 where they outsourced operations, kept dev close to their hearts, and said, let's commoditize the operations. And so it's going to be a barrier for organizations to fully adopt ITIL 4 quickly unless they really get it. So let me tee you up for this as we with our last question. So take your time with this one. How would you advise organizations to move to ITIL 4? Because they may have this legacy, lack of knowledge, the tool set up to be V3, where it's rotely down the process. And you may even have an organizational design that's built on V3. How do you advise somebody to make that big jump? I say it's a big jump. I think it's pretty big.
It's a great question. By the way, just going back 2 minutes, your previous analogy about the paint store, the sort of anecdote that comes to mind, or the example that comes to mind is, you might be painting the inside of your house, and you could tell the guy who's coming in, the painter who's coming in, I want the color to be white, and he might go out and buy a shade called, I don't know, moonlight, and he paints it that way, and you'd come in and say, it's white, but I was thinking of ivory white. The answers are in your head as the sort of service management professional. So you need to take the time to think through this, and that's why, like, a good designer, a good painter would say, okay, you said white, but here's all the swatches, from the paint store. Tell me what sort of white you want, and I can tell you if there's going to be any issues with that. At least the good people I've worked with work like that. Anyway, coming to your question about how to move to ITIL 4. I actually used to talk about this, offering up 3 different ways in which an organization could consider slowly evolving to be more aligned with ITIL 4 ways of working. But before I go into that, let's also take a pause and return to something we discussed in last week's episode, Jeffrey, which is the guiding principles. And one of those guiding principles which you'd highlighted was start where you are, right? Too often have I gone in as a consultant to service management projects where people say, yeah, let's just chuck everything we had out the window and let's design from scratch. Now, in very, very rare cases, it has to be like a flaming pile of whatever, right? In very, very rare cases, you might have to do that, right? You might have to just chuck the whole thing out and replace it with something brand new. But very often than not, it tends to be more lift and shift, incremental improvements, and so on. So start where you are, figure out. And one of the things we didn't talk about last week is one of the nuances of start where you are is also recognizing what Dave Snowden calls the evolutionary potential of the present. So this is where I am right now, but I can only move in certain directions, right? Think about it like a chessboard, right? Your queen can move in any direction, up, down, left, right, either diagonal. But then it might be surrounded by other pieces of the same color, which constrain its ability to move in certain places. And so you've got to figure out, well, what's my long-term strategy to go around that and in the direction I want to go? So start where you are, figure out how you can change right now. Where is it most easy, or where is it easiest to change right now? That's part of the nuance of start where you are. So anyway, going back to the 3 options of how to evolve your service management practices and so on. The first option that I used to talk about is adopting the guiding principles, right? Which is a big organizational change program in of itself, right? So you're embedding certain set of values. Maybe it's not even ITIL 4's guiding principles, but you need a set of guiding principles. But it's an organizational change because you need to reorient your team to this new North Star and start to embed what you think are good behaviors or good decision-making techniques, or whatever it might be. And so because it's an organizational change, the value is there in the medium to long term. Once you've crossed the sort of, the dip, as you embark on organizational change, once you've crossed that sort of, you're coming out on the other side of that J curve, you get a lot of value in the medium to long term, because people are now working in the ways that they're expected to work, the new ways that they're expected to work. But at the same time, you're taking on a lot of cost and risk in the short to medium term, because people might say, I just don't agree with this new way of working, I'm leaving, right? Or it might take a lot of organizational change, coaches and training, or whatever else it might be, to actually try to embed the new ways of working across your different teams. So high risk, high reward is kind of the option with the guiding principles. Or you could say, we'll embed the guiding principles in this small team and start to scale out. There are ways of mitigating these risks. But option number one, start with the guiding principles. Option number two, go to the other end of the service value system, continual improvement. Start with continual improvement, right? Ask the different teams who are, at the coalface, as it were, to say, what would you be able to do to make your job easier, more efficient, more effective, provide a better quality of experience to your stakeholders, etc. Let's start to make the small tweaks that are necessary. You're still, of course, you've got a balance of governance and conformance and all these sorts of things, but start allowing your teams to make small changes over time to improve how they're working, right? You can maybe pair that up with another guiding principle here, progress iteratively with feedback. So make a small change, see whether people like it or not like it. Based on that, turn left, turn right, go straight ahead, whatever it might be. But keep in mind that the context might change. So 6 months down the line, you might have to reverse a small change that you're going to make next week, because the context has changed. You've just got to be able to reverse that change and put in something new. And so that is low risk. It can start to yield a lot of dividends, but in the long term, it might actually be detrimental in a way. And the analogy I use here is you can get faster horses, you can get a more luxurious carriage, but at some point you're going to be overtaken by a car.
Yes.
Right. So you have to be able to constantly scan the external and internal environments to say, is there a radical step change that needs to be introduced that I cannot solve with small incremental changes, and have the courage to be able to invest in those step changes to completely transform your way of working. And the third option is to start with value streams and practices. So it's talked about in the ITIL 4 Create, Deliver, Support book, the concept of a minimum viable practice. So start mapping out your value streams, figure out what capabilities, the word capability there again, what capabilities you need in order to be able to deliver that value stream to the required time, quality, and cost, and whatever other factors and drivers you have. And that becomes your minimum viable practice. And at that point, you can say, right, so we've documented all the major types of work that we have to execute on. We know what capabilities we need. Can we start turning off bits of our service management toolset that we don't need? Can we start, this is going back to the whole optimize and automate bit, right? You're starting to optimize your value stream. You're starting to remove the unnecessary bits of work and so on. But then again, how do you identify what's unnecessary? You do so by focusing on value. You do so by iterative progression as you refine your new, or as you're optimizing your workflows and so on. So that's the third option. So that will definitely provide you with value, maybe not so much as wholesale shift as guiding principles, but that will provide you value in the medium to long term. But again, there's some amount of cost and risk, because you've got to bring in that the consultants with the fresh perspectives, or the facilitators or the coaches with the fresh perspective. You've got to have those difficult conversations about, well, what work can we cut? What is the impact on the team going to be? How do we mitigate those impacts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations there, but that's a third option. fourth option is to combine all of them together, actually. Is to say, look, we will start top down, we will start communicating and embedding these new ways of working and the guiding principles and so on. At the same time, we provide our various operational teams the empowerment or the freedom to introduce small changes as and when they see fit. And at the same time, our middle level management, let's not forget about them. We provide them with the resources necessary to say, well, how do we rework this value stream or those value streams or those practices so that they become more efficient, they become easier to manage, and so on. So you can do some flavor of sort of combining all three, but it's all, as you can see, all of this is based on the service value system and the components. That's how I would start moving to ITIL 4 rather than saying, right, let's shift our incident management from a process to a practice. I have come across cases where people have said, well, we went through our incident management process guide, we did a find and replace, and every instance of the word process got replaced with the word practice. No, guys, that does not work. It's not just a simple relabeling job. It's not a rebadging job. You have to think your way through this.
And I want to add one thing, and then we need to close, but I would also add the other service value system aspect of governance needs to be factored in as we make that shift. We need to do it in a methodical way. Akshay, thank you for joining us for 2 podcasts, sharing your knowledge. We'll have you on again later this year, but thank you once again for joining us.
Jeffrey, it's always a delight to talk to you about this, about service management and IT management and everything in between. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast again. And I would love to know what your listeners think about everything we've discussed across 2 episodes. And yeah, I mean, if you're willing to let me back on and rant for another half an hour at some point later this year, definitely look forward to that as well.
That'd be great. Everyone look up Akshay Anand on LinkedIn. I'll tag him wherever we're posting, and everyone have a great day. Bye.
Bye.